You is finally back on our screens after a year and a half since we last saw Joe leave the States to start his new life away from love. The suburbs were too much for him, and whilst we thought that Season 4 was going to be spent in Paris, we instead saw that his journey to find Marianne led him to London, where he was able to start his new life as Professor Jonathan Moore. With him mixing with the elite class of the UK, this was a world that was definitely alien to Joe. But a murderer and stalker was amongst him, and for once, it wasn't Joe that was the bad guy. So let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from this first part of Season 4. So let's get into it. Here is You Season 4 Part 1 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Why was Joe in London? So the season opened up with Joe living his new life as Professor Jonathan Moore in London, where he wanted to put his past behind him and be able to live under his new alias. However, we saw early on that it wasn't originally by choice that he did this. He went on his journey to Europe after giving up his son and framing his former wife love for his murder, in order to find Marianne and confess his love for her, which he thought she would appreciate and reciprocate back, but that wasn't the case. After going to Paris and finding out that she was in London, he travelled there and found her when he then told her everything about love and why he did it. This was something that we saw put Marianne off of Joe straight away, and ultimately led him to not kill her. He let her walk away. He even did the same when he was confronted by a hitman that Love's family had hired to kill him, but instead he cut a deal in order to get Love's savings. But it meant that he had to kill Marianne as she knew of Joe's true identity. However, just like we saw moments earlier, he let Marianne go because he saw that she viewed him as a monster, and he couldn't stand the fear that was in her eyes when she looked upon him. Joe genuinely cared for her, more than we've ever seen him care about anybody before, more than Beck, more than Candice, and more than Love, as he didn't let any of them live. The identity papers that were handed to him were for Jonathan Moore, and this was the reason why he stayed put in London and became a professor of literature. I feel we're definitely going to see the decision on letting Marianne survive come back to get Joe. It was made a main focus so early on, and I think it could end up bringing some attention to him. The ending explained. As the first 5 episodes of the season went on, we saw that Joe, instead of being the stalker and the killer like we've come to know and see over the course of the previous 3 seasons, we instead saw Joe being stalked and watched by a mysterious person. Professor Malcolm Harding was the first person to be killed out of the group of elite rich people that Joe had found himself befriended with, and Joe was made to think that it was himself that actually did it. However, it wasn't the case. Somebody had carried out the murder and framed Joe. Due to Joe being intoxicated on the night in question, which was the night that he met all of these rich folk, he couldn't remember anything that was said by any of them, or what he said to them either. So he was working from a blank canvas, trying to piece everything together. The person that was being called the Eat the Rich Killer due to the victims only being wealthy people was suspicious of Joe through messages, due to the fact that he felt like Joe wasn't being his true self, and he believed that Jonathan Moore was a front, and we saw that that person did find out that Joe was in fact lying about his identity, so much so that we saw articles on the wall that were about Love, 40, even Beck from Season 1, so the killer knew all about Joe and was essentially blackmailing him and threatening him. This then meant that the show became a murder mystery about finding out who was blackmailing Joe and why they were doing it. As the episodes went on, we saw that Simon was the next person to be killed, and then Gemma was killed in the penultimate episode. Kate looked as though she was going to be next due to the way that the killer was talking when messaging. Joe and Kate had grown closer and closer as the season had gone on, so much so that she became his you. He was falling for her, something that he said he wouldn't do again. But he was quite literally risking it all in order to protect her. With the elites thinking that Joe was the killer after Roald, Kate's obsessive long-term friend and wannabe lover, found Joe by Gemma's body, we saw him state how he was going to hunt Joe in the woods, leaning into the aristocracy and the mindset that we saw these rich folk have throughout the entire season, treating people they viewed as below them as trash. However, after Joe managed to fight off Roald, we saw a character that we hadn't seen in a long time, Rhys Montrose, poor boy who became rich due to his book that was a huge success. He knocked out Joe and put him in a dungeon that lied beneath Phoebe's mansion in the country. Rhys was the person who was sending Joe all of these messages and was behind the killings that were occurring. Rhys was a character that had a troubled past and found his way into wealth, rather than being born into it like everybody else that we saw. and as he mentioned at the start of the episode, he said how he felt as though people that were born into it were prepared to watch the world burn. So there was a deep hatred inside of him for the people that were apparently his friends, which also made sense as to why he wanted to run for mayor and do good for the people. He took an interest in Joe because he genuinely believed that Joe would be able to help him, especially due to the connection that they formed right back in episode 1, with Joe even stating that Rhys was the only person that he felt as though he didn't want to kill. With Rhys keeping Roald and Joe locked up, and with Joe not killing Roald like Rhys wanted him to, as he wanted all of the murders to be pinned on Roald, Rhys set the place ablaze and was prepared to let them both burn. We saw that Joe managed to break free, and we actually saw a different side to Joe. He saved Roald and broke him free from the shackles despite the fact that Roald was hunting him a matter of moments earlier, showing a true change in the character. Something he definitely wouldn't have done in earlier seasons, but it's clear to see that he's trying to become a changed man. Something else that leaned into that was when he turned down Kate in the final moments of the final episode because he didn't want to trouble her with his past because he knew that he would hurt her. Usually he just gets infatuated and will disregard his interests' true feelings. So a change is definitely present within the character. What happened with Marianne definitely changed him. The final thing that we saw was Rhys announcing his candidacy for the Mayor of London on TV, to which it seemed as though he has a high chance of winning due to him appealing to both sides of the wealth spectrum and the respect that he seems to have. Joe will most likely be looking to expose Rhys in the next part of Season 4, which will be interesting to see if he's successful in doing so. Especially considering that Rhys knows all about Joe's true identity that he wants to keep secret, so Rhys most definitely does have the upper hand. I thought this first part of the 4th season was pretty good. Whilst it was great to see Joe back on our screens, I do have to say that this did feel like the most different when compared to any of the previous seasons that we've had. It almost felt like a genre change occurred. Usually the shoe is on the other foot, and I feel that's what we've come to expect from the show. But with this season, it felt as though they turned it more into a murder mystery, with Joe still doing the occasional killing, but it instead focusing more on Joe hunting down the person who was doing the blackmailing. There wasn't as much focus on Joe and his infatuation with somebody, and the personal side to his life, which I think we all get great enjoyment out of watching. Everything kind of felt on one level and not as deep as what it usually is, which is a true shame. I didn't feel the urgency around finding out who the person behind the messages was, because it didn't feel like there was actually that much at stake. It never felt like they were going to expose his true identity. There was also no box as well, which I think is a shame, as it's become synonymous with the show. Nadia's story was interesting as she played the Paco and Ellie type role. I just feel we'll get more of that in the second part of the season. She felt like his only genuine human connection, so it would be good for that to be explored more. Especially as I imagine Joe's mind will start to get a little more troubled. Whilst I did enjoy this season, it just felt extremely different, and not in the way that I imagined it playing out. It's a shame, but I will still watch the next part of the season to see if Joe's identity does get revealed, and if he does manage to take Rhys down. So, there you have it. You Season 4 Part 1 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos such as Endings Explained, theories and predictions and character breakdowns, then click on the I button. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of this season? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.